everyone. So we're going to do a little bit of talking about our seasonal theme for spring as we come toward the end of spring. The seasonal theme of spring has been insight, because spring is a time of awakening. Spring is a time of coming into the light again and seeds opening. And there's nothing that, for me, somatically speaks more to that than those moments of insight that people have as they move through their daily lives, when they're in some kind of healing practice. And that way that insight just is like, you know, this blossoming. I like to call insight the emotional plinko, where it's like all of these things kind of come together. And so we wanted to take a little bit of time to talk in more detail about insight, like the process of insight itself, and to do this little kind of interview to give some of my thoughts about insight, and hopefully they inspire some thoughts about insight for all of you.
Perfect. Thanks, Aisha.
Yeah.
So before we dive into that, before we dive into this process and these moments of insight, I was wondering if, to start us off, you could give us kind of some simple steps or maybe a quick activity for maybe those of us who aren't super familiar with even feeling out our own body boundaries, and just kind of those, kind of give us a starting place for that, to become more aware of our own body.
Yeah, as with all things, the body is the home of insight. It's the home of where all of our sense of awareness starts. And so having some container of the body is really important to feeling like you have the capacity for insight. So I've been playing a lot lately with these neurotactile practices that help to just gently soften the proprioceptive system, that help to orient the body to like, where is my end, you know, and thusly where is my beginning in relation to the world outside. So we'll do just a few really light touches on the body. So the pressure that I'm going to encourage you to use on your own body as you do this is like the pressure of like the weight of like your blanket on you. You don't want to, you know, get deep into the tissue, just a really light touch so that we're sort of stimulating the tissue just under the skin. So we're going to start first with the head, and we're going to bring one hand to the forehead to cup the forehead, and one hand to cup the occiput, the curve of the back of the head. If having your arms up like this is uncomfortable for your body, you can sort of slouch inward or slouch medial into the center line of the body. But if you can hold arms up and open, feel free to do that. So just taking a moment to close your eyes. Noticing just first where the breath is able to go, without trying to change your breath pattern at all. You might just notice first where there's space and where there's tension or constriction. And gently bringing hands to the crown of the head. So the hands are encircled toward the back third of the head. Again, if it works for you to have eyes closed, letting eyes be closed. If it feels better for you to have your eyes open, just a light gaze against the ground. Just feeling the warmth of your own hands. And bringing hands to the jawline, encircling the ears like so. And again, a light pressure. And bringing hand to the heart. You can have hand be flat and open on the heart center. And bringing the other arm behind the back to encircle and hug the body. A little bit of light pressure downward on the front of the chest and upward on the back body. And then gently switching directions, upward on the front of the chest, downward on the back body. Again, the pressure doesn't have to be heavy. And bringing hands to the shoulders. Hands encircling the shoulders and gently and slowly stroking downward all along the arm toward the wrist. A little traction at the wrist, pulling in both directions, and then release. And again, basically saying, this is where I end. And release. You can do this as many times as feels good to your system. And again, coming into the heart, I'm going to bring an open palm again to the heart. And bringing the other hand now to the sacrum, the lower back. And you can allow that hand to be open palmed, cupping the entire sacrum. You can use the back of the hand, whatever feels good to you. And again, we're going to start with going downward on the heart and upward on the sacrum very gently. And switching directions. And now a similar piece, moving the hand from the heart to just under the lower belly. Again, you can have an open palm. And here we'll do the same piece again. So a downward on the lower belly and upward on the sacrum. You'll notice that your lower back arches. And then a movement in the other direction. So upward on the lower belly, downward on the sacrum. And again, light pressure. As you do this, if you're sitting, it's good to have your feet flat on the ground. So you're not bringing another arch into the back, the lower back. And then allowing, I'll sit back a little bit so that it's visible, allowing your hands to sort of circle from the flank of your side all the way down to your ankle, and letting go. I'm lifting my leg so you can see, but I invite you not to lift your leg if that's possible. Sitting on the floor sometimes helps with this, or you can do a bit of a forward fold to get at the full leg. And then same on the other leg, starting at the flank, coming down toward the ankle. And then the last piece is holding the foot. So we'll just do one foot here for the purposes of our work. Here's my foot. And so holding the ankle with the opposite hand that of the foot you're using, and then the same side of the body, holding the bottom of the foot, the arch of the bottom of the foot. And just listening with your hand for a heartbeat in the bottom of your foot. And again, with eyes closed or eyes open, whatever feels best for your body. And then for the purpose of balance, doing the same on both sides, but we'll allow ourselves to take some time to move on. Hold on, let me grab my shoes and come on back to you. Yeah. Take a moment to feel into how you're doing in your body now that we've done a little bit of settling.
Thank you so much. I was doing that along with my camera off. I really liked the front and back body simultaneous stuff. That really made me feel cute.
Yeah, I spent all weekend in this neuroreflex integration training with this organization that does really cool, very precise work. And, you know, I'm kind of obsessed with reflexes and how much they organize our felt sense of self, and are so much about how we come into understanding how we move through the world, literally and physiologically. And so there's so much that we were talking about around flexion, which is this kind of folding forward toward midline, and extension, this moving backward or opening the chest and the hips to the world. And, you know, if you think about it just from an energetic perspective, like what does this look like, right? And what would then all of the emotional connotations and sort of psychological connotations be around this positioning frozen in the body versus what does this look like, right? So, and then all of the connotations and psychological implications for how we experience ourselves if that's what's frozen in the body. Or if we have a combination of the two frozen in the body, how we are living that out then on a day-to-day basis. And so this gentle pattern of like working with balancing the flexion extension patterns in the front and back body, the side bodies, right? That actually helps us orient and organize around our midline, which is our center of gravity. And it's our central sense of self, the central axis. So it's just a really cool, very, very simple, very subtle practice that we can begin to play with in our own bodies around feeling more settled by using the physiological structures of our skeletal muscular system to communicate to our brain, hey, we're okay, right? I mean, I get nerdy about this stuff.
I know, I can tell you could go on for like another hour just on that one thing. Well, I'm sure we'll carry that on to future interviews as well. But I figured we could transition into kind of the bulk of what we're talking about today, which is that those aha moments that you mentioned, or this kind of process and of like understanding, yeah, these moments of insight kind of thing. So from this somatic practitioner standpoint, if you could talk about what epiphany or aha moments really mean for the body. I mean, we're halfway through 2021 now, but obviously coming out of the like height of the pandemic, or maybe we're going to see a second height of this pandemic come through, similar with the racial uprisings and the people's movement and everything. It's just what happens in the body, what's happening in the body, what's triggered. I guess we could start there.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways, this is such a poignant moment around the anniversary of George Floyd's murder and the beginning of the racial justice uprising, both here and internationally. There was such an aha moment that happened for people who have been, you know, in denial or in a state of, I'll talk about this more in a moment, in a state of undercoupling. and also not just an aha moment toward action for people who were acutely aware of the injustice, but also a sense of access to agency was kind of the aha that I think has happened for a lot of people in finding voice and finding opportunity to be in collectivity with voice. So this feels like a really great time to be talking about, like, how does insight show up in the context of the body, knowing that, like, I'm a bit of an astrology nerd, and knowing that the like astrology that started the racial justice uprising is ongoing and is like manifest actually right like tomorrow. That George Floyd's murder happened on like either the day before, day after of the eclipse cycle that we're on right now. And tomorrow is the next eclipse in that cycle. I'm really curious to see what the next month is going to look like, because there's 2 eclipses that are happening in succession, I should say, in this cycle. And and a lot of the same conditions, social conditions that were at play at that time are still at play. So we'll see. I feel like it's going to be a bumpy ride the next couple of months. But that being said, this idea of like what's happening when we are awakened into insight. In trauma, when we have to manage or package trauma in some way, we package it in the context of what somatic experiencing calls coupling dynamics. So in coupling dynamics, we either overcouple or we undercouple. And overcoupling is when, all things become one thing. And undercoupling is when we literally cannot make a connection between things. And so in a lot of ways, this kind of like, this idea that like racism is like over, or we're in a post-racial world or whatever, is an undercoupling. It's this inability to actually see the connection points between all of the forces, implications, and experiences of injustice that are happening in the world around us that are related to institutionalized racism. On a more personal level, undercoupling looks like I just can't see the like pink elephant in the room that everybody else can see, because my entire trauma structure has organized me away from being able to see those connection points. So what's happening in an aha moment is that something that has been undercoupled is suddenly getting coupled back in. And all of the energy that was attached to what kept that thing undercoupled, that piece of information undercoupled, comes back in with it. So that might be grief, or that might be rage, or that might be terror, like whatever the thing is, whatever those energies are that have kept that insight at bay, the energy, the sensations also come back with the insight. And what you get is what I described as this like emotional plinko. What you get is this sort of like ping, 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 like connection that's happening through all of these various places in your life where you were not able to see this pattern or this process that is involved in the undercoupling. I don't know that this is a fact, this piece that I'm about to share, but I like to think about, so in our, in all of the like neurological connections of the brain that we have, it's called the connectome. So we have like all of our genetic information is our genome, and we have like a connectome in our nervous system. And when there is a lot of trauma physiology on board, that connectome gets really rigid, right? There's not a lot of like spontaneity in the connections. And I think about, this is very theoretical, I think about that moment of something that is undercoupled getting coupled in as like a moment of the creation of spontaneous connections that can actually expand the connectome or expand our capacity to see, move, feel, breathe through the world. So that's what I think is happening actually physiologically, is I think we are actually building neurological connections. So here's the thing. I think if you take it down to brass tacks, right? Like I was saying that I spent a lot of this weekend, or this whole weekend, doing training in neuroreflex integration. And, one of the things that we were learning about is like the fact that, like, why do we have a brain? If we're talking about these neurological connections, why do we have a brain? And the truth is that the brain is actually designed evolutionarily to help us locomote. And so the more complex the movements or actions, the more complex structures we have to have in the brain to support those actions, in the neurological infrastructure to support those actions. So literally, evolutionarily, our brain developed through movement. And so if we think about this collective moment as like a awakening of like, oh gosh, there's racism in the world. Gotta do something about it, right? Like if we wake up, right, that waking up is actually a call to action. If we think about the like expansion of the connectome is always a call to be able to move in a different way, even if that movement is a subtle movement. So, like any neurological connection, we can lose it if we don't actually move, if we don't reinforce the connection. Yeah, it's unpleasant. I mean, that's the easy answer. I think Resme handles this piece really well when he talks about, it's you got clean pain or dirty pain. It's pain either way. So it's unpleasant. And the repetition, in general in system science, like we want to have homeostasis, right? So we want to have continuity of whatever has been happening. And shift involves the expression of energy. And so, if I'm continuously seeing the same thing, when I see a different thing, I'm going to have like a different response pattern to that. And it requires a whole energetic attention, and it requires a whole integration of that material. At a very simple sort of psychological level, it requires effort to integrate. And like, frankly, some of us either don't have the energy, right? Or aren't motivated to make the effort, or don't have the capacity within our nervous systems to do either. And I think that is how we get stuck in what I call capitalist drift, where we just keep going in the inertia of like the shit that we don't necessarily want to be doing, is because it requires a lot of energy and effort to do something different. And that's really hard. It's a lot easier if you have a lot of money, but that only continues to reify the same system, because then you're just buying it. It's much harder for us to like deeply trust each other. The thing that has been really influencing my thought processes lately about collective healing has been Malidoma Some's The Healing Wisdom of Africa. It's been like such a gift to be sitting with like really slowly. I'm a slow reader, and some things I will sit with and chew on for a while before continuing in the text. And so I've been sitting with this book for a couple of months now, and it's just been so supportive in understanding why it is that we struggle so much in the West. If we can describe the West as those of us who are living under capitalism and colonization, which is the vast majority of us. And one of the things that he was talking about in his book is this idea that like we heal in community as a way to hold community together, and the process of healing in Indigenous communities as ritual. And yeah, I just think we don't have a lot of that in our culture. And that piece of like the energetic letting go that he talks about that's a part of ritual and that I've experienced in the spiritual circle that I hold. Like there's not many spaces to be able to do that. And when we aren't really able to sort of lose ourselves in the collective, outside of spaces like a sports arena or, a music concert, or something along those lines, where there's not actual connection being had between people, but it's like a spectator experience of loss of self. Yeah, I think there just isn't really the ability to build the kind of connections that we need to get out of capitalism. And so in many ways, I really do believe that like the answer or the insight is, if we're going to start small, is to start in ritual, is to build circles, like small circles that are ritual circles, and to start to catalyze deep connections through whatever ritual processes that we're working with, whether it's, a more sort of divine spirit that's, associated with a monotheistic religion, or if it's, connecting to earth and allowing that vitality of earth to be the transformative piece. So, if we spend all of our time and energy only ever orienting to the threats that are in front of us, of climate change, of the way that, capitalism is intensifying economic indignity, if we only ever focus on those things that are essentially apocalyptic, it's paralyzing. It's completely paralyzing, which is an appropriate response to the world as we know it ending in front of us. And, allowing ourselves to turn our attention toward resource, toward where is their connection, toward where is their community, toward where is their mutual interest, toward where is their pleasure, towards where is their desire, towards where is their joy. Those natural resources then foster, and then we have more power, and I think BLM, Black Lives Matter, not the Bureau of Land Management, BLM is such a powerful and potent force around the demonstration of how that works, because while the public face of BLM is like protest and pushing for policy change and, that sort of thing, like we have to remember, where did BLM start and with whom? It started in conversation with people. It started with just like offering loving support to people who had lost loved ones, in the face of police violence. So, it's important to remember that the roots of the movement began organically from a place of love. And the vision of the movement is organized around a place of love. So, within that, of course, there's lots of agitating work to do, and it's not to be cavalier or to pretend that like, joy is just going to get us all the things and Pollyanna it, but it is to remind us that, love is a more powerful force than anger or hatred. I mean, it sounds trite, but it's also true. It's more generative and sustainable.
I love that word, generative. Okay, rounding out this hour. So for those watching, what would be your advice to your community? If we could like shrink it down, what would be your advice to those of us out here to find our small groups, to find these safe places where we can be in ritual and hold these containers for healing with each other, with our neighbors, with our kin, with our loved ones?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would say is use your circles wisely. Too often when we like break down into affinity groups, so, you know, it's like Black people, you know, folks with mobility challenges, you know, like queer folks, like when we break down into our affinity circles, too often what is centered in those affinity circles is whoever is the oppressor, or too often what's centered is pain. And oftentimes the piece that's missing is like pleasure on a small scale and vision on a big scale. And I think that's the piece that would be the piece that I would recommend. Like if I'm, you know, if I have a like, you know, circle of folks that I'm making connection with on a regular basis, like the question is like, what do we talk about when we're together? Do we spend our time shit talking other people? Do we spend our time, you know, bitching or complaining about this, that, or the other thing? Like, what do we spend our time actually doing? How do we spend our time nourishing one another? You know, how do we spend our time building resilience together rather than complaining about the resilience we don't have? And that's going to look different, obviously, from circle to circle. But I feel like I'm always in these lessons within the spiritual circle that I am in. It's a small group of 5 other femmes, and we meet every month and we do various levels of intensity of ritual together. You know, there's an ongoing dialogue that we have with one another throughout the month, and that dialogue helps to frame how we come into then ritual again. And it's such a meaningful conversation to be having. You know, I spend all day, every day with people in my practice talking about orienting toward where is your resource? What gives you a sense of generativity? This season on an Emergent Liberation Collective that we're working on now for the summer, our theme is desire. And, you know, breaking it down and having this kind of deeper conversation with one another about like, what is desire really? And, you know, we've really identified it as a generative creative force. And when we organize ourselves to what is creative, that's where like there's juice, there's joy, there's pleasure, there's the opening of seeds. So I think that's the thing that I'd say to folks is like, be thoughtful about how you are using your time with the people that you care about. And that the time that you're using is time that is actually nourishing rather than time that's just spent tearing down. You know, if you're using social media, use it for that purpose rather than being in a state of just tearing shit down. Or like, what's the term? Let's see if I can remember it. Hate watching. It's a very nihilistic way of navigating the world.